This past week, Pope Leo XIV issued what may be the most significant papal encyclical in over a century, and its subject was artificial intelligence. Now, popes don't issue encyclicals casually. These are rare, formal letters addressed not just to Catholics, but to all men and women of goodwill. They are reserved for moments when the Church believes something fundamental about human dignity is at stake. The last encyclical of comparable historical weight was issued in 1891 by Pope Leo XIII, who wrote in direct response to the suffering that was brought on by the Industrial Revolution. As the New Yorker's Jill Lepore put it, Leo XIII indicted robber barons. Leo XIV indicts tech moguls. But there's also something much more fundamental at stake in this moment. What makes AI different from every prior transformational technology in human history is not just its scale or its speed, it's what it threatens to replace. The printing press democratized knowledge. The steam engine replaced human muscle. The internet connected the world. All of that was revolutionary, but none of those technologies threatened to replace human thought itself. None of them could learn or adapt or reason or create. And while AI, like the mechanical loom and electricity and the combustion engine and the internet, will do groundbreaking things for us. In fact, just this last week, a mathematical problem that couldn't be solved for 80 years was in fact solved by AI. This feeling that, at least for now, AI will cost us more than it gets us is becoming pervasive. And that feeling is surfacing everywhere, in town halls and zoning meetings, in protests and college commencement ceremonies, in big towns and small ones across the country. So the Pope, who's taken to commenting on things like wars and immigration, you know, the thing that gets to the heart of humanity, issued his encyclical in which he calls on AI's developers to place moral concerns at the very center of their work. The response from Silicon Valley has largely been, that's a bad take from the Pope. This conversation is manifesting in different ways in America right now. The loss of jobs like my own, that until now required a reasoning that only a human could possess, to AI. The fact that AI and the companies that create it and the semiconductors needed for it are the strongest performing stock sector since the early days of the internet, and that investors in those companies are now the richest men in the world. And the fact that AI is an industry with virtually no regulation, that collects your information and uses it in ways you may still not be able to comprehend. But there's a much more practical, a closer to home issue that is causing Americans from across the political spectrum to unite against AI. You see, for all the benefits of new technology, there are costs. And for 7 in 10 Americans across both political parties, the cost is too high. 7 in 10. 7 in 10 Americans won't agree that today is Saturday. As the New York Times puts it, the most united Americans have been on anything since beer. And the collective pushback to data centers is serious enough that it's rewriting politics, especially at the local level. MS Now's Josh Einiger spoke to conservative voters in Texas, Republicans, about the impact of a huge data center getting built in their community, and here's what they told him.
It's like living on the edge of Niagara Falls, or you're on a runway next to a jet that's taking off, but this jet doesn't take off. This jet stays. We feel completely let down. We've been mowed over, steamrolled.
I'm just heartbroken. I mean, I am absolutely heartbroken.
We, us, the little people, we're the victim, because it seems to me that data centers are more important than we, the people.
Our data center is going to flip the Senate seat.
Absolutely, yes, 100%.
My entire community is going to break rank. Everybody. All of us. We've had enough.
This is happening across the country, by the way. The New York Times recently profiled Ryan Wagner, a self-described MAGA Republican who teamed up with liberal environmental activist Seth Bernard to fight a planned data center in their town of Kalkaska, Michigan. Referring to Democrats, Wagner told the Times, quote, "We've been foes for a long time, but when it comes down to our backyards, we realize we're really just the same people," end quote. Meanwhile, Wagner's become less sure of his own party. While he still calls himself a conservative, he says that he doesn't feel Republican anymore and that the data center plays a huge part in that. Can you imagine, after everything that has happened in politics and society in the last 10 years, that this is the thing that's going to turn a Republican into a Democrat? This has less to do with partisan politics than it has to do with powerful, arrogant, and controlling tech companies. The politicians at the state and federal level who give those companies tax breaks and other incentives, and city councils that approve these projects against the wishes of their constituents. Take Festus, which is in Jefferson County, Missouri, a town of about 13,000 just south of St. Louis. In late March, its city council voted 6-2 to approve a $6 billion data center, even as residents packed the chamber to object, warning about water, electricity, and the value of their homes. Key details like who would even operate the facility were still unclear. The deal went through anyway. So the residents did something about it. Days later, they voted out every single council member who was up for re-election. 4 of them gone, poof. One 8-year incumbent lost by more than 40 points. Every one of their challengers had run on transparency in opposition to the data center. Turnout for the municipal election more than doubled, and when that still wasn't enough to stop the project, a residents group called Wake Up Jeffco filed a lawsuit alleging that the council had violated open meeting laws. Festus is not alone. Virginia is the data center capital of the world, with more than 660 of them already operating in what is known as Data Center Alley. The backlash there has become so intense that developers behind one of the largest data center projects ever proposed, a 2,100-acre campus in Prince William County, pulled out entirely in April after years of opposition from residents. Polling tells the story. According to a Washington Post Schar School poll, the share of Virginia voters comfortable with a data center being built in their community has fallen from nearly 70% in March of 2023 to just 35% in March of 2026. In the American West, the stakes are even more surreal. In Utah, county commissioners just approved a data center that is twice the size of Manhattan. At 40,000 acres, it's projected to consume more electricity than the entire state of Utah currently uses. Approved over the objections of hundreds of residents in a meeting that was so heated that the commissioners walked out and finished the meeting remotely. And consider where this is happening. These are some of the driest places in the country. A single mid-sized data center can consume as much water as 1,000 households. What these communities can sustain and what's being asked of them is wild. Arizona, California, Nevada, they've been forced into emergency agreements just to keep the Colorado River water flowing. And into a region already rationing water, already staring down an historic drought, the plan is to drop in server farms the size of cities. In Arizona, one of the country's data center capitals with nearly 100 already running, neighbors routinely flood hearings and sign petitions by the thousands, and elected officials approve the projects anyway. The developers, as one resident put it, come armed with an army of lawyers and lobbyists, but Americans keep showing up to these town halls over and over, the same pattern. Leaders cut the deal, and people organize to try and undo the deal. Just this week, Arizona's largest proposed data center was scaled back by roughly 80% after a wave of opposition. Even as there's growing consensus that AI must be regulated, the response from the tech oligarchs has been hubris and defiance. And the same can be said for America's political leaders. It was just this past December that Donald Trump signed an executive order aimed at preempting states from enacting AI laws, directing his Justice Department to challenge state regulations in court and threatening to withhold federal funding from states that don't fall into line, showing once again how wildly disconnected this administration is from the average American. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, recently defended the staggering amount of energy that AI consumes by comparing it to the energy that it takes to raise a human child, literally inputting a human life into some sort of efficiency equation and suggesting that the machine comes out ahead. In his words, quote, "It takes a lot of energy to train a human. It takes like 20 years of life and all the food you eat during that time before you get smart." He actually said those words. During a 2025 earnings call, Alex Karp of Palantir welcomed investors to the Palantir revolution and as for the people AI will displace, quote, "This is a revolution. Some people can get their heads cut off." Meanwhile, tech execs are predicting that AI could wipe out half of all entry-level office jobs, possibly within the next couple of years. These are not fringe voices. These are the men building the thing. And to them, efficiency is the only metric that matters. Meta announced in a recent memo it's cutting 1,000 jobs, roughly 10% of its workforce. The memo said that the layoffs were, quote, all part of our continued effort to run the company more efficiently and to allow us to offset the other investments we're making, end quote. Those other investments they're making, noted in the same memo, tens of billions of dollars in AI infrastructure. Amazon CEO Andy Jassy, in a memo last June to his 1.5 million employees, said that the company expects AI to shrink its corporate workforce, that, in his words, we will need fewer people as Amazon gets efficiency gains from using AI extensively across the company. Efficiency. Months later, Amazon cut 14,000 jobs. The tech overlords that control our economy and increasingly our politics have decided that efficiency is the #1 goal, and anything that stands in its way, whether that's a worker or a community or a watershed, your humanity, it's all acceptable collateral damage. And that's probably why tech CEOs are being booed by college graduates across America. They've grown up, these kids, watching technology promise to make everything better, and instead they've watched it radicalize their parents, monetize their loneliness, and now arrive at their graduation to take their jobs.
Last December, Time magazine selected its Person of the Year for 2025. And this time, it was the architects of artificial intelligence. Interesting.
The rise of artificial intelligence is the next industrial revolution. What happened? Okay, I struck a chord.
Yeah, you struck a chord. These graduates and the many residents showing up at town halls demanding more input and more regulation are all asking the same thing. How much of our humanity are we willing to sacrifice in the name of efficiency? Pope Leo cautions that those who control digital platforms wield enormous power, not just over what we see, but over what we accept as real. And that brings us to the other great danger that an unregulated AI poses. As Pope Leo warns, those who control this technology can present, quote, a particular vision of reality as desirable, end quote. What he calls pure power detached from the truth. A democracy depends on a basic shared agreement about facts, and when that erodes, the Pope warns, democratic life begins to weaken. Quote, indifference to the truth leads slowly but surely to a descent into totalitarianism, end quote. To make the point, Pope Leo quotes Hannah Arendt, the political philosopher who fled Nazi Germany and spent her life studying how totalitarian regimes take hold. She found that the perfect subjects of such a regime are not the true believers. Quote, the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction and the distinction between true and false no longer exist, end quote. When a people can no longer tell what's real from what's not, they can be convinced of anything. Pope Leo offers an antidote, and it's a strikingly human one. The remedy for a world fracturing into rival truths, he argues, is dialogue. Quote, dialogue is an ordinary part of human life. It involves acquiring an attitude that seeks to forge bonds of fraternity, built on listening and open demeanor, making time for each other, and even wasting time together. For if we experience authentic encounters with each other, with those who are different, strangers and migrants, it becomes much more difficult even to imagine war, end quote. Even wasting time together, he says, authentic encounters. What Pope Leo describes as an ideal is the exact opposite of Silicon Valley's rallying cry for efficiency. The AI data center revolt is a story about citizens who were never asked, watching their communities, their water, their utility bills, their livelihoods, their very humanity reorganized around some tech billionaire's vision of the future. Americans are responding to the feeling that the ground beneath them is shifting because it is. That the world is being remade around them by forces that they didn't choose, that they don't understand, and that they can no longer trust.